I want to pose a question to you actually, because
Please.
I do find as we're starting to talk about sustainability in the industry, you hear some advisors might say, my clients don't really care. I think that maybe that comes from sometimes a client's a misunderstanding to what sustainable travel is. They think it's maybe, she wants to know, they want me to book something where they recycle and, maybe they compost. Do you find your clients are much more engaged with how deep sustainability is within companies and why it's a reason to travel?
It's age-based in its response. The older generation is not as conditioned to care about it generally. The younger generation, much, much more so. And it's interesting. I'm reading Bill Gates' new book right now, the climate change book. And it's something Ashish and I have talked about from Big Five, where if you wanted to know what happens when the world stops, commerce stops, you found out.
Yeah.
Bill Gates points out that there's only about a 5% reduction in the 51 billion cubic tons of carbon that we put out there every year. COVID only eliminated a 5% reduction.
Wow.
And that needs to go to zero. And it needs to go to zero because that carbon stays in the atmosphere, 70% of it, for as much as 10,000 years. That's why it needs to go to zero, because we will never break free of this without it. And I think sustainability is one of these things that people like to post on Instagram, but I'm not sure that they always want to live it. And I think that you live it, and it's important to me. And if I'm answering your question properly, I think that we can do things like eliminate single-use plastics, like source things locally, like try to reduce our carbon footprint in a myriad of ways. It's being done more responsibly in the ocean vessel programs too, with propellerless new green technology propulsions.
I think, how do you speak to your clients to have them understand why this is an important part of their selection of who they travel with? I know that some clients will come to you and they'll say, I want to go to Antarctica and, I'm looking at this. And is it a part of what you're focused on helping them understand what the options are that will care for a place at a deeper level?
Yeah. When we talk to our clients about this, one of the things we talk about is the fact that tourism and over-tourism was a big theme, but under-tourism is a big theme too.
Yes.
And this is one thing that I preach as much as possible, because the dollars that we bring as travelers into those communities are jobs. And in the case of Ashish from Big Five, they do the Rhino program with some of their proceeds. Well, what do you think's happening right now with no guests? It's probably a lot more poaching when there were guests. So those people are employed, they're educated. Ashish builds schools. Mm-hmm. So I kind of been saying, if you want to take the first step in being a global citizen, don't flight shame. Get on a flight, go somewhere, support a local culture. You want your kids to be global citizens, go learn about local cultures, make a donation. But if nothing else, donate your time and come back and tell the story.
Right.
Because that's the important part. You don't really realize how critical this is until you go somewhere where there are not opportunities like New York City and Tennessee. Yeah. And when travel goes to zero, 10% of GDP drops off. That's real for people, okay, whether they realize it's 10% of GDP or not. Yeah. But it's also a really big problem for these poorer communities. They need those jobs. They're good jobs. They're honest jobs. And that's how I think some of our guests, through hopefully some of our influence, but on their own, are starting to understand the impact of sustainability globally when they travel and how they can make that decision.
Well, and it's so interesting you say that, because when Lars-Erik Lindblad first started Lindblad Travel, the whole reason he started it was he was really an explorer in his own right. He was out there traveling the world, and he realized that there were these remarkable places that did not have their own voice, and they were already suffering from habitat loss, wildlife degradation. And so he realized right then that the only way to protect them, the only way to ensure that we preserve them, was to take people to see it, to educate them about it and impassion them, so they would then come back as a voice for their preservation. And so that's the whole premise of what we do every time we step off. It's to make sure people come back and they get the tingles every time they think of that trip, but they also tell their friends, we need to make sure our kids see this. We need to make sure that, we make changes that help to protect these places. And so, yeah, it's really important. And as you said, the type of work that sustainable product does, particularly, things like Ashish does, where you're helping to cut down poaching by employment and education and caring for communities. And you're right, Sven wrote an amazing piece about under-tourism just recently. And it talks to all of that we need to be there to preserve these places.
No question.
Yeah.